Well, hello there, my angels. Come sit with me here on my front porch on this warm July afternoon. I'm Patricia Ann, though most folks around Millbrook know me as Miss Patricia. I've been living in this simple, honest house for more years than I care to count, watching the seasons change and the children grow up in this quiet Arkansas town. You know, people always say that family is the safest place in the world, that home is where the heart is, that blood is thicker than water. Well, honey, that's the biggest lie I've ever heard in my 71 years on this earth. Sometimes the most dangerous place in the world is inside your own house, in your childhood bedroom with your dolls and drawings on the wall. Sometimes the person who hurts you most is the one who shares your last name, who sits across from you at the dinner table every night, who everyone in town thinks hung the moon. My brother Danny did things to me that even the devil himself wouldn't dare. And when I tried to tell the truth, when my belly started growing at 14 years old with his child inside me, my daddy looked me straight in the eye and said, "Making things up again, girl. Stop your lying." I'm 71 years old now, and I've kept this secret hidden for almost 60 years. But tonight, sitting here with the fireflies starting to dance and the evening air carrying the scent of honeysuckle, I reckon it's time this story gets told. Maybe there's someone out there who needs to hear it, someone who thinks they're all alone in their nightmare. But before I start telling this story, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our future videos. Also, like and share this video so many people can see it. People need to hear what they think it can never happen. Now let me take you back to 1949, to a time when Arkansas was even more backwards than it is now, when men ruled the roost with iron fists and women were expected to keep their mouths shut and their eyes down. Millbrook was nothing but a speck on the map then, a farming community where everybody knew everybody else's business, or thought they did. Our house sat on the edge of town, a small clapboard structure with 3 rooms. The living room where Daddy held court, my parents' bedroom, where we children were never allowed, and a back room that me, Danny, and I shared with nothing but a thin curtain hanging between our beds. My daddy, William, worked as a foreman down at the lumber mill, a big man with hands like ham hocks and a voice that could shake the windows when he was drinking, which was most nights. He had that old-fashioned idea that men were put on this earth to be in charge, and women and children were put here to do what they were told without question. "This house runs the way I say it runs," he'd announce at dinner, pounding his fist on the table for emphasis. "And what I say goes, no arguing, no backtalk, no nonsense." My mama, Helen, was a wisp of a woman who seemed to get smaller every year. She worked at the town laundry, coming home each evening with her hands red and raw from the harsh soap, smelling like other people's dirty clothes and defeat. She'd whisper little warnings to me sometimes when Daddy wasn't around. "Stay quiet. Don't make him angry. Mind your brother." But she never had the strength to protect me when it mattered. Danny was 5 years older than I, born in 1934, when I came along in 1939. He was what folks in town called a golden boy, handsome as the devil with those bright green eyes and that charming smile that could talk his way out of any trouble. All the mothers in Millbrook loved Danny Patterson, always going on about what a helpful young man he was, how polite, how respectful, if they only knew. I was the disappointment, the child they never really wanted. Daddy made no secret of the fact that he'd been hoping for another boy when Mama got pregnant with me. "This one was a miscalculation," he'd say right in front of me, like I was a piece of furniture that couldn't hear. But what can you do? Life gives you what it gives you. For the first 7 or 8 years of my life, things were about as normal as they could be in our house. Danny and I played together like regular brothers and sisters, climbing the old oak tree in our backyard, catching crawdads down at Miller's Creek, learning to whistle through our teeth. He taught me how to skip stones and tie my shoes and catch fireflies in mason jars. But somewhere around the time I turned 9, things started to change. Little things at first, so small I almost didn't notice them. Danny's hands would linger a little too long when he helped me down from the tree. He'd give me looks that made my stomach feel funny, like he was thinking about something that made him smile in a way that wasn't quite right. He started coming to my side of our shared room at night, crawling into my narrow bed and wrapping his arms around me in hugs that felt too tight, too possessive. "I'm just keeping you warm," he'd whisper when I'd try to squirm away. "Sisters need their big brothers to take care of them." Mama would see him there sometimes when she'd come to check on us, and she'd get this look in her eyes, frightened but helpless, like she knew something was wrong but didn't know how to stop it. "Danny, you sleep in your bed," she'd say weakly. But Daddy thought it was wonderful. "Look how much they love each other," he'd beam when he'd find us together in the morning. "That's what I like to see, a united family. Danny's going to take good care of his little sister." That Easter Sunday when I was 9 years old, Mama had made me a beautiful yellow dress with tiny white flowers embroidered around the collar. I felt so pretty in that dress, spinning around in front of the mirror, while the ladies at church complimented me on how grown up I looked. But when we got home from service, Danny cornered me behind the house, his green eyes blazing with something I didn't understand yet. "I don't like how those men were looking at you today," he said, grabbing my arm hard enough to leave bruises. "You're mine, Patricia. Mine. And I don't want you giving your attention to anybody else. You hear me?" The possessiveness in his voice, the way he said mine like I was a toy or a pet, sent ice water through my veins. But I was 9 years old and he was my big brother, so I nodded and promised to be good. Mama must have heard something in the way I cried that night, because she came to sit on the edge of my bed and smoothed my hair back from my forehead. "Some people in this world take what they want without asking," she whispered so quietly I could barely hear her. "And sometimes we don't have the power to stop them. But you remember, Patricia Ann, none of what happens to you is your fault. You remember that, baby girl." I didn't understand what she meant then. I wish I had never had to learn. The bathroom in our house had a lock on the door, but it seemed like that lock was always breaking. Every time I'd try to take a bath or use the toilet in privacy, Danny would come bursting through that door like he'd forgotten I was in there. "Oh, sorry," he'd say with that charming smile, but his eyes would stay glued to my body in a way that made me want to disappear. "I forgot my towel," or "I need to brush my teeth real quick," or "I left my comb in here." Always some excuse, and always that look that made me feel dirty and ashamed even though I hadn't done anything wrong. When I'd complain to Daddy about the broken lock, he'd just shrug and say it was my fault for not calling out that I was in there. When I'd beg Mama to make Danny stay out when I was bathing, she'd just hand me a towel and tell me to hurry up. "Modesty is a luxury we can't afford in a small house," Daddy would say when I'd try to cover myself. "Danny's your brother. Don't be foolish, girl." But the way Danny looked at me didn't feel brotherly. It felt hungry, predatory, like he was planning something that I wouldn't like. By the time I turned 11, the bedtime visits had become a regular thing. Danny would wait until he thought Mama and Daddy were asleep, then slip across our shared room and crawl into my bed. He'd stroke my hair and whisper things that made my skin crawl. "You're the most beautiful girl in this whole family," he'd murmur against my ear. "Prettier than any of those girls at school. You're special, Patricia. You're mine." On my 11th birthday, he brought me a piece of cake to my bed and sat watching me eat it with that strange intensity. "You're growing up," he said softly. "Time you learned some things about what happens between men and women." That night, he put his hand over my mouth and hurt me in ways I didn't have words for. When I tried to scream, he pressed harder. "Shush now," he whispered. "This is normal. This is what big brothers do for their little sisters. And if you tell anybody, if you even think about opening your mouth, I'll tell Daddy that you've been talking to that boy Mike down at the grocery store. You know what Daddy does to girls who talk to boys." I did know. I'd seen Daddy's belt, felt the sting of his hand across my face. The thought of him turning that violence on me for something I hadn't even done was more terrifying than what Danny was doing to me. So I stayed quiet. I bit my tongue and flew away in my mind. imagining I was a bird soaring high above our little house, above Millbrook, above Arkansas, anywhere but trapped in that narrow bed with my brother's weight pinning me down. It became routine after that. 2, sometimes 3 times a week, Danny would come to my bed after the house grew quiet. I learned to leave my body, to send my mind floating up to the ceiling where I could look down and pretend it was happening to someone else, some other girl who looked like me but wasn't me. At school, I started withering away like a flower without water. I stopped eating lunch, stopped talking to the other children, and stopped raising my hand in class, even when I knew the answers. My teacher, Miss Morrison, would ask if everything was all right at home, but I'd just nod and say, "Yes, ma'am, everything was fine." How could I tell her the truth? How could I explain that the golden boy everyone loved, the helpful young man who carried groceries for elderly ladies and always said, "Yes, sir," and "No, ma'am," was hurting me in ways that had no names? Meanwhile, Danny was becoming more popular than ever. The whole town thought he hung the moon. So polite, so helpful, such a good influence on the younger children. If I'd tried to tell anyone what he was really like, they'd have thought I was crazy or lying or both. When I turned 13, my body started changing in ways that made Danny even more interested in his nighttime visits. I developed breasts, my hips widened, and one morning I woke up to find blood between my legs that scared me half to death. Mama found me crying in the bathroom and handed me some old rags with instructions to be careful now and watch yourself around boys. But she never explained what was happening to me, never told me this was normal, never prepared me for the fact that my changing body would make me even more of a target. Danny became obsessed with the changes in my body, commenting on every new curve, every sign that I was becoming a woman. "Boys are going to start sniffing around soon," he'd warn me with that possessive edge in his voice. "But they can't have you. You belong to me, and I don't share what's mine." He started talking about my future like he owned it, like he had the right to decide what happened to my life. "When you're old enough to marry," he'd whisper during those awful nights, "Daddy and I will choose who gets you. But until then, you're mine to take care of." In December of that year, I finally worked up the courage to fight back. When Danny came to my bed that night, I pushed against his chest and told him no, told him to leave me alone. His reaction was swift and brutal. He hit me so hard across the face that I saw stars, then pinned me down with a violence he'd never used before. "Don't you ever tell me no," he hissed. "You're mine, and you'll do what I say when I say it. And if you ever try to fight me again, I'll make sure you regret it." That December afternoon, when Mama and Daddy had gone to town for supplies, Danny came home from school with a look in his eyes that made me run for the back door. But he caught me before I could get outside, dragging me back to our room by my hair. What he did to me that day was worse than anything before. I fought him with everything I had, but he was bigger, stronger, 5 years older, and fueled by a rage I didn't understand. When it was over, there was blood on the sheets, blood on my nightgown, blood in places where blood should never be. I couldn't move for hours. I just lay there wishing I could die, praying to God to please just let me stop breathing so this pain would end. That's how Mama found me when she came home, curled up in my bed, staring at the wall, dried blood on my legs and a look in my eyes that made her scream. "What happened?" she cried, pulling back the bloody sheets. "Patricia, baby, what happened to you?" For once I told the truth. I told her everything. About the nighttime visits, about the bathroom intrusions, about Danny's threats and Daddy's blindness, and the way our golden boy brother had been hurting me for years. Mama cried harder than I'd ever seen anyone cry. She held me and rocked me and whispered that she was sorry, so sorry, that she should have protected me better. When Daddy came home and found us both crying, Mama tried to tell him what I'd told her. She showed him the bloody sheets, pointed to the bruises on my face and arms, and begged him to listen. But Daddy's response was exactly what I'd expected. "The girl's making things up again," he said coldly. "Probably been fooling around with some boy, and now she's trying to blame Danny. You know how she is, Helen. Always telling stories, always trying to get attention." Danny, of course, played his part perfectly. He acted shocked and hurt that I would accuse him of such things. "I don't know why she'd say something like that about me," he said with those green eyes full of false pain. "Maybe she's jealous because I get better grades, or maybe she's trying to cover up for something she did. You know how girls her age can be." And just like that, I became the liar, and Danny remained the golden boy. Daddy made it clear that if I ever repeated those stories again, I'd get a beating that would make me wish I'd never been born. So I stopped trying to tell the truth. I buried it deep inside where it festered like an infected wound, poisoning everything good that might have grown in my heart. The new year came, 1965, and with it came a horror I never could have imagined. In January, I started feeling sick in the mornings, running to the bathroom to throw up until there was nothing left in my stomach but bile. I missed my monthly bleeding in December, then again in January, then in February. By March, my body was changing in ways that terrified me. My breasts were sore and swollen, I craved pickles and sardines, and my belly was starting to round out, even though I was barely eating. I was 14 years old, and I was carrying my brother's child. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I sat on the floor of our tiny bathroom, counting on my fingers, trying to make the math work out differently, praying that somehow I was wrong. But there was no denying what was happening to my body. I tried to hide it as long as I could, wearing Daddy's old shirts and binding my belly with strips of cloth torn from old bedsheets. But by March, when Mama caught sight of me changing clothes, there was no hiding the truth anymore. She took one look at my swollen belly and sank to her knees right there on the bedroom floor. "Oh, sweet Jesus," she whispered. "Oh, my poor baby girl." We cried together that morning, holding each other and grieving for the childhood that had been stolen from me, for the innocence that could never be returned. When Daddy found out, his rage was unlike anything I'd ever seen. He stormed around the house like a madman, demanding to know whose baby I was carrying, how many boys I'd been with, what kind of daughter he'd raised. "Whose is it?" he screamed, grabbing me by the shoulders and shaking me until my teeth rattled. "How many were there? How long has this been going on?" When I tried to tell him the truth, tried to explain that it was Danny's baby, that Danny had been hurting me for years, he backhanded me so hard I fell to the floor. "Don't you dare blame your brother for your sin," he snarled. "Danny's a good boy. This is all you, girl. This is what happens when daughters don't mind their place." Danny, meanwhile, had his version of events ready. He claimed that Mike Henderson, the boy who worked at the gas station and sometimes talked to me when I walked by, must be the father. "I tried to warn you about him, Patricia," Danny said with that perfect mask of concern. "I saw how he looked at you, but you wouldn't listen. Now look what's happened." Poor Mike Henderson. Within a week of Danny's accusations, Mike's family had packed up and left town, rather than face the shame and gossip. An innocent boy's reputation was destroyed to protect my brother's secret. The whole town turned against me then. I was the Patterson girl who'd gotten herself in trouble, the 14-year-old who'd been running around with boys, and now had to face the consequences. Meanwhile, Danny was praised for trying to protect his wayward sister, for being such a good brother despite having such a disappointing sibling. I wasn't allowed to go to school anymore. Couldn't have the other children seeing a pregnant girl, Daddy said. It would set a bad example. So I was trapped in that house, growing bigger every day with a child I'd never wanted, created from violence and fear. The pregnancy was hard on my young body. My feet swelled up like balloons, my back ached constantly, and I felt like I was carrying a weight made of lead. Mama did her best to help me, sharing what little knowledge she had about childbirth and trying to prepare for a home delivery, since taking me to a doctor would mean admitting to the town that the Patterson family had problems. September came with the first cool mornings of fall, and with it came the pains that meant my time was near. I went into labor at dawn on a Tuesday, and for 16 hours I writhed on my narrow bed, feeling like my body was being torn apart from the inside. The baby was breech, coming backwards, and for a while, Mama thought we might lose both me and the child. She prayed over me and did things with her hands that I tried not to think about too hard, maneuvering and pushing until finally, the baby slipped into the world with a cry that filled our small house. It was a boy, tiny, but perfectly formed, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were already showing hints of green. Danny's eyes, despite everything, despite the violence of his conception, despite the horror of the pregnancy, despite my terror of what this child represented, I loved him from the moment I saw him. He was innocent, this little boy. He hadn't asked to be born into this nightmare any more than I'd asked to be trapped in it. Daddy named him Charles William Patterson after himself. A proper man's name, he declared. This boy will amount to something. Since Mike Henderson was long gone and there was no father on record, Charles became officially fatherless, another shameful mark against our family in the eyes of Millbrook. But Danny had other ideas about his son. He's mine too, Danny would whisper when he thought no one could hear. My blood, my boy. I'll teach him to be just like me. The thought of Danny having any influence over my baby filled me with a terror stronger than anything I'd felt for myself. I started sleeping with Charles in my arms, refusing to let Danny hold him, standing guard over my child like a mother wolf protecting her cub. The abuse didn't stop after Charles was born. If anything, Danny became more possessive, more violent. He seemed to view the baby as proof of his ownership over me, another chain binding me to him forever. Now you can never leave, he'd say during those awful nights. You're tied to this family forever now, you and my son. When Charles was 3 months old, I made my first real attempt to escape. I packed a small bag with diapers and bottles, wrapped my baby in the warmest blanket I could find, and tried to slip out through the kitchen door while everyone was sleeping. But Daddy had been expecting something like this. He was waiting for me at the gate, sitting in the darkness like a spider in its web. "Where do you think you're going, girl?" he asked quietly, and the calm in his voice was more terrifying than any shouting. He dragged me back to the house by my hair while Charles screamed in my arms, then beat me until I couldn't stand up. The threat was clear. If I ever tried to run again, the consequences would be even worse. "You belong to this family," he told me as I lay bleeding on the kitchen floor. "And this family doesn't let go of what belongs to it." 2 months later, I tried again. This time, I went through my bedroom window in the middle of the night, carrying Charles in a diaper bag, planning to walk to the highway and hitchhike to Little Rock or Memphis or anywhere that wasn't Millbrook. I made it as far as the Johnsons' yard before their dog started barking, waking the whole neighborhood. Daddy found me hiding behind their barn, shaking with fear and cold, my baby crying from hunger and exhaustion. The beating he gave me that night put me in bed for a week. And the message was clear. If I tried to run again, he might kill me. And then what would happen to Charles? I was trapped more completely than ever. A prisoner in my own home with a child to protect and nowhere to turn for help. But sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. In the summer of 1966, when Charles was almost a year old, a girl named Rosie came to Millbrook to spend the summer with her grandmother. She was from New York City, daughter of a banker, and she had stories about a world I'd never imagined. A world where women could work and live on their own, where single mothers weren't automatically shamed, where there were places to go for help. "There are boarding houses in Washington, D.C., she told me one afternoon when we were sitting by Miller's Creek while Charles napped in the shade. Places where women with babies can get work and a safe place to live. The government agencies hire women now, even women with children. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe there was a way out. Maybe I didn't have to spend the rest of my life trapped in that house with Danny. But escape took money, and I had none. Every penny that came into our house went through Daddy's hands first, and he made sure I never had access to any of it. That's when Mrs. Wilson stepped in. She was the mayor's wife, a childless woman who'd always been kind to me, and I think she suspected more about my situation than she ever said out loud. She started bringing baby formula to the house, claiming it was from the church charity, but I noticed the cans were always the expensive kind, and there were always more than Charles could need. "You never know when you might need extra," she'd say with a meaningful look. "It's always good to have a little something put aside." I started saving everything I could. Loose change found in coat pockets, money from selling eggs from our chickens, even pennies found on the street. It wasn't much, but slowly, very slowly, I was building a small fund. Then, in October of 1966, everything changed. Daddy had been acting strange for weeks, complaining of stomach pains, looking yellow around the eyes, and refusing to eat Mama's cooking. We all thought he was just getting older, maybe working too hard at the mill. On October 15th, he collapsed at the breakfast table. One minute he was cursing about the coffee being too weak, the next he was convulsing on the kitchen floor, foam coming from his mouth, his body going rigid as a board. The town pharmacist came as quickly as he could. We didn't have a real doctor in Millbrook then, but it was too late. Daddy's heart had given out, a massive attack, probably brought on by years of drinking and rage and the strain of carrying so much hate in his chest. William Patterson was dead at 51, and suddenly, the prison that had held me captive had lost its warden. The funeral was a theatrical production of grief and lies. Half the town came to pay their respects to the good man who'd been taken too soon, the family man who'd worked hard to provide for his wife and children. If they only knew what that provision had cost. Danny inherited everything, of course. The house, the little bit of money Daddy had saved, the authority to make decisions for our family. At 24, he was now officially the head of the Patterson household, and Mama and I were completely dependent on his mercy, which meant I was in more danger than ever. But Mrs. Wilson had been watching, waiting for an opportunity. 3 days after the funeral, she appeared at our kitchen door with an envelope in her hand. "I want to talk to Patricia," she said firmly when Danny answered, "Alone." She led me to her car, parked out of sight of our house, and handed me that envelope. Inside was more money than I'd ever seen at one time. Enough for bus tickets to Washington, D.C., enough for a month's rent at a boarding house, enough for a new start. "There's a woman named Mrs. Crawford who runs a boarding house on 16th Street, she said quietly. "She takes in women with children, helps them find work. I've already written to her about you." Mrs. Wilson looked me straight in the eye then, and I saw that she knew. Maybe not all the details, but she knew enough. "Some prisons don't have bars," she said, "and some wardens don't wear uniforms, but that doesn't make them any less real." She gave me Mrs. Crawford's address, made me memorize it, then made me promise something that broke my heart even as it offered hope. "If you take this money, if you go to Washington, you can never come back," she said. "You can never write, never call, never let them know where you are. It's the only way to be truly free, and it's the only way to keep your son safe." I understood. As long as Danny knew where I was, I'd never be free. He'd find me, bring me back, and make me pay for trying to leave. The only way to escape was to disappear completely. November 3rd, 1966. I'll remember that date until the day I die. It was the day I chose life over existence, freedom over safety, hope over fear. I waited until 4 in the morning, when the house was deeply quiet. Charles was sleeping peacefully in my arms, and I'd packed everything we owned into one small bag. A few changes of clothes, his bottles and diapers, the little wooden rattle that Grandma Wilson had carved for him. Mama was waiting for me in the kitchen when I crept through with my bag and my son. She didn't say a word, just looked at me with eyes full of tears and love and terrible understanding. "I know," she whispered when I started to explain. "I've always known. And I'm sorry, baby girl. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." She pressed a small bundle into my hand, more money, saved from her laundry wages over the years, everything she had. "You make a good life," she said, kissing Charles's forehead one last time. "You make a life worth living." Rosie was waiting for me at the bus station, just like she'd promised. She'd driven down from New York just to see me off, to make sure I didn't lose my nerve at the last minute. "You're the bravest person I know," she said as we hugged goodbye. "Don't you ever forget that." The bus ride to Washington, D.C. took 18 hours. 18 hours of the Arkansas landscape give way to Tennessee, then Virginia, then finally the city that would become my salvation. Charles slept most of the way, and I spent those hours staring out the window and trying to imagine what life might look like when we were free. We arrived at Union Station at midnight on November 4th, and I took a taxi to the boarding house address Mrs. Wilson had given me. Mrs. Crawford was waiting up, just like she'd promised in her letter, and she showed us to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Welcome to Washington," she said simply. "Welcome to your new life." I never went back to Arkansas. Never called, never wrote, never let anyone from my old life know where I was or what had become of me. As far as Millbrook was concerned, Patricia Ann Patterson had simply vanished into thin air. Instead, I became Jessica Smith, a young war widow with a baby son and a quiet determination to build something better from the ashes of everything I'd lost. I got work in the kitchen of the boarding house at first, then later in the cafeteria of a government building downtown. It was honest work, clean work, and for the first time in my life, I was earning money that no one could take away from me. Charles thrived in our new life. He was walking by his first birthday, talking in full sentences by 2, and showing no signs of the violence that had shaped his earliest months. He was just a normal, happy little boy who loved picture books and toy trucks and didn't remember anything about the place we'd come from. When Charles was 3, I met Mr. Robert at the government cafeteria where I worked. He was a retired civil servant, a widower in his 60s who ate lunch there every day and always had a kind word for the staff. He started asking about Charles, bringing him little toys, treating him like the grandchild he'd never had. "That boy needs a grandfather," he said one day with his gentle smile, "and I could use a family to look after." By 1969, we'd moved into Mr. Roberts' house in Georgetown, a proper house with separate bedrooms and a backyard where Charles could play safely. Mr. Robert never asked questions about our past, never pressured me for more than I was ready to give. He just accepted us as we were and gave us the gift of stability. Charles called him Grandpa Rob, and the old man doted on him like he was blood. He taught Charles to ride a bicycle, took him to baseball games, and helped him with his homework when he started school. For the first time in my life, I saw what a healthy family could look like. When Mr. Robert died in 1973, he left us his house. His own family was furious. They couldn't understand why he'd leave his property to strangers instead of his relatives. But Mr. Robert had understood something they didn't. Sometimes the families we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into. Charles grew up believing his father had been a construction worker who died in an accident before he was born. I told him stories about this fictional man, how brave he was, how much he loved us, how proud he would have been of his son. It was a beautiful lie, much kinder than the ugly truth. By the time Charles graduated from high school, he was everything I dreamed he could be. Kind, intelligent, hardworking, with no trace of the violence that ran in his biological family. He went to Georgetown University on scholarship, studying engineering, and graduated summa cum laude in 1980. He married a wonderful woman named Claudia in 1982, and they had 2 children, Mary Claire in 1985 and John Robert in 1987, named after the grandfather who'd helped raise their father. I became Grandma Jessica to those precious babies, and they brought more joy into my life than I'd ever thought possible. Charles built a successful engineering firm, specializing in government contracts. He's respected in his field, beloved by his family, and completely ignorant of the circumstances of his birth. And that's exactly how I want it to stay. Now, at 73 years old, I spend my days babysitting my grandchildren and my evenings reading on the front porch of the house that Mr. Robert left us. Charles and his family live just a few blocks away, and we have dinner together every Sunday after church. Sometimes I wonder what happened to the people I left behind in Arkansas. Mama died in 1978. I read about it in the obituaries when I subscribed to the Millbrook newspaper for a few months just to see. Danny's name was listed among her survivors, but I felt nothing when I read it. Those people belonged to a different life, a different girl who had ceased to exist the day Jessica Smith was born. Charles doesn't know the truth about his conception, and I pray to God he never will. Some secrets are too heavy for children to carry, even when those children are grown men with children of their own. My son knows he's loved, knows he's wanted, knows he has a family that would do anything for him. That's enough. The truth is for me to carry alone, and I'm strong enough to bear it. I survived hell itself to give him a better life, and watching him thrive has made every moment of that suffering worthwhile. To anyone out there listening who might be living in their version of hell, I want you to know this. There is a way out. It might not look like the way you expect, and it might require sacrifices you're not sure you can make, but it exists. Sometimes escape means leaving everything behind, your name, your past, your very identity. Sometimes freedom requires becoming someone new entirely, and sometimes the greatest act of love is protecting the people you care about from the truth of where they came from. I chose to become Jessica Smith because Jessica Smith deserved a life worth living. I chose to leave Patricia Ann Patterson buried in Arkansas because that girl had suffered enough. And I chose to give my son a future unburdened by the sins of his biological family. Those choices made me who I am today. Not a victim, but a survivor. Not a tragedy, but a triumph. Not the girl who was broken, but the woman who rebuilt herself from the pieces. If you're out there tonight, scared and trapped, and thinking there's no way out, I want you to remember my story. Miracles aren't just things that happen in the Bible. They're things that happen when people decide they deserve better and find the courage to reach for it. Family isn't always about blood. Home isn't always where you were born. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect the people you care about from the truth of what you survived to give them a better life. But before you consider leaving, kindly subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications if you want to hear more stories like mine. Stories of women who found the strength to rewrite their endings, who chose hope over despair, who proved that no matter how dark the beginning, you can still create a beautiful life. Thank you for listening to An Old Woman's Secret. May you find the courage to write your own story of survival and hope.